Hey everybody, I'm Bob Bakert with Jazz Guitar Today, and I'm here with my good buddy Bill Hart. You know, Bill's been on the channel many times, and most of you should know who he is. He's also a contributor and jazz and just guitar player extraordinaire here based in the Atlanta area. Just decided to move back. He was up in Montreal for a while, checking that out. Decided he didn't want to freeze his ass off up there, and came back came back to Atlanta. Originally from Canada, so you should have known better, Bill.
I know.
Bill's an avid cyclist. I must say motorcyclist, I should say. Harley Davidsons, be him. Ape hangers forever, you know. Um, and he is he was an educator at what's the name of the school there in Atlanta there, Bill?
Atlanta Institute of Music,
Atlanta Institute of Music, which and that came from where?
GIT. It was a subsidiary of GIT when it
Yeah.
started back in '86.
Yeah, so Bill was there for 25 years, 30 years?
28 years. I started in about 86, 87, and I left about 2016.
Yeah, we're too young to be talking about 28 years of any one thing, you know.
No.
Anyway, so so we got into the conversation, and we have these all the time, about jazz, jazz guitar. What is jazz and what is jazz guitar, and what does it include? And it's a very broad category. It's a very broad envelope that people use. And for example, we all know of the Wes Montgomerys who are Charlie Christian, Wes Montgomery. I mean, we could go on and on. Barney Kessel, all the guys that, basically archtop into an amp, and that tone that's been around, and we love it. And it's a big part of jazz guitar today. And then we also embrace the guys like John Scofield and Mike Stern and oh, I don't know, I'm leaving somebody out here.
Scott Henderson,
Oh, well,
John
Scott
McGraw.
Henderson for sure. Yeah, I mean, we're that use that use these guys guitar pedals. I mean, this is a very small board. I've got a bigger one over there with reverbs and delays and all kinds of things. And
And
so
not to leave out Pat Metheny.
not to leave out Pat Metheny and just a lot of people use pedals and a lot of people don't. So let's talk about pedals, why people use them, how they use them, what they're for, what they do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a big supporter of both schools. I play, as you know, Bill, we play a lot of gigs where we turn on the overdrives and let it fly, and then we played gigs where I'm on an acoustic guitar, literally a flat top acoustic, or one of the jazz boxes that I own, and those go straight into the amp. Um, so I like it all. I mean, I like it all. But let's specifically talk about the use of pedals in jazz, how it happened, why it happened, and your thoughts about the whole thing.
Okay, well, you do have the jazz police that are totally against it, and that's what they grew up with, and that's fine. I'm like you. I love that sound with an arch top straight through the amp. But to me, jazz is really about innovative music, and what comes along with that is not only the music itself, but also the equipment that goes with it. Um, I think as we evolve in the music of jazz, the equipment evolves too. Um, you know, um, and everybody uses, it would be hard to say Pat Metheny's not a jazz player and he uses synth guitars. I mean, he's probably one of the top guys of the world that could hold that title as being a great jazz musician.
Right.
You know, so yeah, I mean, I think me personally, I like using a lot of pedals depending on what I'm doing. Um, I like using a nylon string straight through an amp. So it depends on the guitar and the type of music,
Right.
but to me, it's more about the music evolving, along with the gear.
Well, there's two things that go along with this. Sometimes it's a necessity because if you're a working guitar player and you hire out for gigs and they call you up and they say, "Hey, we want someone to do a brunch. We want this to be, quote unquote, jazz guitar, a la West, you know what they're asking for, the Great American Songbook as played by, that kind of thing." But then you get the people that call you to gig and they're doing more modern music, more progressive music, and all that, and you're expected to have that overdriven tone. You're
Right.
expected to have a modern, quote unquote, modern guitar tone to play in a band that's playing those kinds of tunes. That's one issue. And we'll talk about these separately, if you will. And then the other one is, I know that on your records, that your stuff is very forward, forward moving. I mean, your stuff is, you know, um, in the ilk of a John Scofield, and I keep using John, but where there's overdrive, there's reverbs, delays, there's all this and that, and so there's two schools. The working musician that finds himself, if he wants to get work, he's got to be able to cover the gig,
Hmm.
and then there's the working musician who is known for specifically that thing.
Right.
And so anyway, with that being said, let's talk a little bit more about um, your own music, I guess, to get started with. What is it about your music, and why do you want to use an overdriven guitar, um, you know, in your music?
Um, I would say that being somewhat of a fusion guitar player can kind of be a struggle because I like everything.
Right.
There's certain sounds, certain when I'm composing music that would lend itself to a more of a distortion, sweet sound for the melodies or the solos than a straight ahead jazz guitar would. I know I had an experience where I was fortunate to get an L5 one time, and the music I was playing was basically, the standard American real book. But there was also some tunes in there that, by Herbie Hancock and people like that, that was a little more funky. Um, and the L5 was perfect for the straight ahead plug into the amp, but I couldn't get blues or funk out of that to save my life, you know. Um, so, I mean, I think guitars and pedals are specifically for a certain sound you're going on, whatever style of music you're doing. I've got an endorsement with the Montreal Canadian Godin guitars, and they saw a video of me playing an orange Strat at a jazz gig, and it sounded like jazz. And the comment was, "Wow, I've never heard that play jazz before." You uh, and I think a lot of the touch comes from your fingers and your feel as well.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, I've seen Matheny play with just an arch top and sound beautiful, and then I've seen him use robots and synths and pedals, and you know. So, I mean, I understand when jazz police can say, they use nothing but an arch top, and if you do anything outside of that, you're not a jazz player. But I don't really buy that. I mean, if they like it, that's their thing, that's their language. That's what
Well,
they.
yeah. I mean, let's talk about what the different pedals do. We're talking about for people who aren't, who don't plug into pedals or never have. I mean, there's a lot of people that be listening that know exactly what we're talking about. And there's some guys going, I don't know, I don't know anything about pedals because I never wanted to know anything about pedal. And we're not trying to sell pedals here, by the way. We're just talking about this. Um, I guess the most common, or the three most common pedals, effects, if you will, would be overdrive.
Mhm.
And then that can go into, distortion, fuzz, and all those things. But overdrive is the kind of the big envelope.
Yeah,
Reverb,
reverb definitely.
and then delay.
Delay, yeah.
So, those are kind of the big three. And then after that, I guess chorus would be probably the next most popular. And then after that, maybe tremolo or something. I don't know. I think that the big four, if you will, are overdrive, reverb, delay, and chorus. Those would be
Yes.
the big ones. So overdrive, one of the things that overdrive allows you to do is it makes the guitar it compresses the signal a little bit, and it makes the guitar sustain longer and sing a little bit.
Hmm.
Gives you more of a saxophone kind of you know uh, dynamic, if you will, or timbre, than say a straight ahead guitar without it. Would you agree to that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. The word you said was makes it sing a little more.
Yeah,
You know, you kind of got that violin sound, um, with an edge to it. And it brings out the melody a little more, brings out your solo a little more, you know.
especially if you're playing in kind of a loud scenario. Um,
Right.
it helps it cut through. So some people that that I mean the obvious examples of we keep going back to Schofield. Hey John, I hope you're doing well. You can definitely tell there's something going on with with his guitar. But then you get the rock guys like Eric Johnson, who his what's the 1,000 pound violin? Wasn't that his tone? I mean,
Yeah.
that's all achieved through various pedals, overdrives, destroy fuzzes, and all that kind of thing. And it allows you to think more like a violinist or think like a saxophonist, because the attack and the rise time and and all of that it just changes the attack of the instrument, and it changes the envelope of the instrument. So there's attack, there's a rise time, crest factor, decay, and long tail. That's the kind of broad categories of sound. And the archtop guitars have a very I mean, they're very dynamic on that attack. It's you can really hear the bop 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 bop. You can hear each string being attacked. Jimmy Bruno or Frank Vignola, people like that. When you listen to them play, I mean, you can really hear every note popping off. Um, and then if you move that to someone like a oh well Oz Noy, for example.
Yeah.
Oz is playing a lot of times he's playing a Strat, a lot of pedals, a lot of overdrive, and all of that. The ability to think a little bit more. I'm gonna use this word lyrically, because you got this thing somewhere between a saxophone and a violin,
Hmm.
and you can always turn it off and get back to a more of an archtop attack. But then you get into strings. String gauges have something to do with that too.
Yeah.
So if anything that I've said there makes sense, because this is really kind of our discussion. We're not really interviewing. We're just talking between you and me.
Yeah, and when you mentioned Schofield, the thing that I mean, I'm a big Schofield fan too. In the '80s, he was using a rat pedal, which was just kind of unheard of for a jazz guy to be using a rat pedal. But he liked the sound and the edge that he got to what he was going for, and it sounded great. And he was still playing jazz lines with it. So it's a mix of just kind of making the sound, tweaking the sound, I guess you would say, with using
Yeah.
pedals. Just um,
Well, the the guitar. The challenge has always been to make the guitar louder and have it stick out when you solo. I mean, Freddie Green is obviously famous for chunking his way and and having very thick strings and very high action, and you could hear him in the back without any microphone on him. I mean, he made that sound. But if you're playing single note lines, and my guitar can't be heard over here, I would play a couple of lines. If you're playing single note lines, he would never be heard.
right.
You would never be heard at all. So obviously amplifiers, would make a big difference. And then of course, then being able to play a lyric line as opposed to a more staccato type timbre. Um, well, what about reverb and delays?
Um, I'm a big fan of reverb and delay. I mean, I would say that the pedals from my experience being a guitar player is, if I've got to be comfortable with the way I sound, the way I hit my notes, that it feels good, so I don't have to over overplay to try to get what I'm trying to go for. And when I have reverbs and delays and stuff, it kind of adds that to the sound that I'm trying to produce so that I don't have to overplay, that I can focus more on the music rather than trying to punch away a good sound, you
Right.
know. That's, I mean, you can get oversaturated with it, which then it gets too wet, but just dialing it in to where it just feels good makes me feel more confident about my playing, so it's also a personal thing for using pedals, not just for a certain sound.
Well, I'll get a, this is gonna be the layman's technical explanation as to what you're doing when you're adding reverbs and delays. I want to thank Dr. Amar Bose with the Bose Corporation. Rest in peace. He when I worked with those guys for about I think about 15, 18 years, I was a representative for them. I didn't work for the factory. I was contracted to the factory to sell their professional products, along with Crown and a whole host of other manufacturers, 600 manufacturers over a 30-year career of representing manufacturers. So, but the easiest way to put this is that you're looking to put your instrument or your voice in a space. And reverbs and delays allow you to put them in the space. And an example of that is when you go hear an orchestra back in the old days, the orchestra always had a shell. And the purpose of the shell was to have the direct sound from the instrument, and then the delayed sound would be the indirect sound would be bouncing off of everything. So it's what they call reflected. So you have a direct and reflected ratio to give you the perfect quote unquote acoustics, and that can be dialed in for each instrument in each scenario. So what you're doing is you're electronically creating the space that you want people to hear your instrument in. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So if I'm playing a guitar and I put it right up to my ear, right here, and I strum it, that sounds, you know, not quite musical, it's just loud. But if I give it some space to air out, then I'm going to get the direct sound of the guitar and the reflected sound off of the windows and the walls and here and that. And that ratio, remember that ratio, direct, reflected, that ratio is what's being manipulated by reverb pedals and delay pedals. So and that is what gives you how much presence do I want to be in. Like for example, on a vocal, now I'm really getting to the weeds here, but on a vocal, typically you want to be heard, most people, depending if it's a rock vocal, of course, you want some distance. But, Frank Sinatra and people like that, Bing Crosby, who worked with Les Paul to create a whole lot of this, they wanted to be able to sing in a big space, 3,000, 4,000 people, but not have to project to the back wall because that's kind of what Ethel Merman did, and that's what Al Jolson did. That's what all these these old singers that would hit the back wall with their voice, and that's what opera singers had to do. Um, what he wanted to be able to do was crooning, and crooning is basically singing to somebody that's 3 to 8, 10 feet away from you, and so to make it more personal. And so, what you would see is that they would do the opposite. They would make it so that no matter what environment you were in, they would dial in the environment that make it seem like we're only 6, 8 feet away. Which when you go to a concert, that's kind of what you do. Now, if it's a rock concert, then they want they're going to have the vocalist to be 15, 20 feet away, electronically. Okay. So when we get into reverb pedals and delay pedals, reverb manipulates the direct reflected ratio, and the delay pedal enhances that. Because what it does is that when you send a signal out into a room and it comes back, that there's a time factor there. How many milliseconds is it taking for that delay to get back? And is that a good reflection or is it a bad reflection? They call that, positive and negative. Well, some people would say interference, but and that can cause comb filtering and other things, which it's really not the scope of our discussion here. But so that's what reverbs and delays are doing. They are setting for you the expectation of the room that you want to have people feel like you're playing in them too. So, an example of that is you and I, we used to play at the Velvet Note. In fact, you're still at the Velvet Note. There's a room that seats 50 people.
Yeah.
And if we make it sound like we're in, Royal Albert Hall, it's not gonna sound right. People are gonna say, that's not right. You want it to be intimate. But
Yeah.
that place, it has decent acoustics, but you still have to use a little reverb in there to wetten up the sound a little, to create a little bit more space, and to not sound like you're playing right in people's eardrums, because that's the biggest problem is that when you turn up too loud in a small club, you're bringing your guitar right to their eardrums, and it's not pleasing to most people.
Right.
Anyway, does any of that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's you could really go down a rabbit hole with the sound and the bouncing and the measurements and
Well, I have, I mean, I not only
yeah,
today, but I mean that was my stock and trade for years and years and years, was working with acoustical consultants,
yeah,
and so I'm trying to put it in words that most people that really don't give a crap about any of this, they just want to play their guitar, would sort of get an idea of what we're talking about. All of these things, by the way, can be Googled. It's back in my day, you couldn't Google it; you had to actually go learn it. Um,
right.
but you can Google all this stuff and get an idea of what I'm talking about. Um, but you use reverbs and delays.
I do,
And how
yeah.
do you decide what your settings are going to be?
Well, one thing that I learned when I was doing my first record with Randy Hexter in
Hmm.
1999, um, he was mixing it, and I came in. And the song he was playing, it just didn't sound quite right. And of course, he was a kind of he was the brainy guy at all the measurements of sound, and he said, "Yeah, that's because I got it set to this. But watch what happens if I do this." And what he did is basically, in layman's terms, was he just set the tempo to the tempo of the song and the delay, and it just made it so. It just was like a whole different instrument,
Right,
different sound. So when I use my delay, I always use a tap tempo delay and I try to tap it in with the tempo. So I'm kind of not really trying to go against the tempo of the song. I'm kind of letting it kind of fade in a way where it just kind of blends into the music live.
right,
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing for me using a delay pedal. And the reverb is kind of like what you said. It just, I have to adjust it for the room so it doesn't sound like I'm in Albert Hall with 50 people in the room, because they're not going to, it just doesn't feel real, you
yeah,
know. Um, but I like enough of it to give it some space to where, it feels like it's in a space,
right,
you know. And I have noticed a lot of bands will not use reverb more for a technique, to have a real dry sound where they just do a punch and then it completely ends,
right.
like Dire Straits or something like that. Um, so I know it can be used different ways, but I always prefer reverb. It's, you know, if I'm more comfortable with the way I sound, then I'm going to play better and I'm going to have more confidence.
Yeah, and it allows you to kind of once you kind of dial in your sound and your where the way you want your guitar to, it allows you to go into each and every room and know that you can make minor adjustments to your settings and get your tone right away.
right,
So when you walk into a room that quote unquote has bad acoustics, sometimes you can overcome that by using less reverb, less delay.
right,
Because typically when people talk about bad acoustics, they're talking about it's too bouncy. There's too much reflection going on.
right.
And the
Yeah,
ratio of the direct sound and the reflected sound is so far off that people can't understand a word you're saying. That has to do with the intelligibility and all this kind of stuff. Um,
yeah.
so we kind of I beat that to death. I apologize for being what's the word for Bose? Is that the word? I don't even know.
Oh,
Um,
I think it's all good information because I mean, the one thing you mentioned about it bouncing off the walls is, if you get, I mean, I've seen bands do that where they've had the reverb so high that it's almost drowning out the original signal of the vocal by
well,
the time
that's
the
the
wall
that's the ratio. What is the ratio that sounds the best for the music or the instrument that's being reproduced? Which is
yeah,
what amplifiers do. They're reproducing a sound. What is that ratio? And again, those two are the direct sound and the reflected sound.
yeah,
If you want it to be more personal, you have more direct sound. If you want it to be, so if I right now you're hearing my microphone, and I'm probably 2 feet away from my microphone. But if I bring it here, it's going to sound quite different because you're not hearing much of the room.
right,
You're not hearing my space at all. And if I take it and I move it away, all of a sudden you're start going to start to hear, you know, the wind,
yeah,
this, and that's what we're talking about.
yeah,
That's basically what we're talking about. Moving. So when I do that, I'm taking this microphone and I'm basically sticking my voice in the ear, depending on where your playback speakers are. If you're wearing headphones and you're really going to hear it. A good example of that, by the way, is since we're talking about the reverbs and all that, is so if you're doing a recording session of a rock track, for example, and you're simulating an arena kind of song, something that's gonna, it's meant to be. This song is meant to be played, in the arenas. It's a big, big rock tune, but yet you're recording it in a studio that's small studio. How are you going to make that sound? How are you going to make that sound like it's appropriate? And some people are blessed, like down in Auburn, where they've got a huge room. But most people don't. Most people, the studio, and they're close miking. So if you're close miking an amplifier, you're doing exactly what we just did. You're taking this, and then in post production or in the mix, you're going to add all the reverbs and delays to that really clean, direct sound, and that's kind of what we're talking about.
yeah. And that's a good example what you just did with the mic because the mic where you just had it,
Yeah,
that's where you sound the best. That's where it was. And when you put it back further, you
yeah.
sound different.
Okay, so how does it sound now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I figured. It's more natural. It's like you're sitting right here with me.
Yeah,
And if I move it away, if I put the microphone like 5, 8 feet away, let me put it up here. All right, now all of a sudden you can see that you're getting, now the microphone's probably 4 feet away.
yeah,
So now you're getting a lot more, before it gets to the microphone, these signals here are having time to get to the microphone, in a different ratio from my direct sound of the voice.
right.
So then if I bring it here, so all this, getting back to our discussion, that's what reverb pedals are for,
Yeah,
to allow you to manipulate that time. And if it wasn't a good idea, Leo Fender wouldn't have put it in every, deluxe reverb and super
exactly.
reverb and twin reverb and all that, because it does help a lot.
Yeah.
What about chorus?
Um, I know in the 80s and 90s, I really liked chorus a lot.
Right.
And I think just using it over the years, I still like chorus, but I like it instead of to have uh, it's almost like compression in a way. The best way to hear chorus is when you really can't hear the chorus. You
When you
know?
when you don't know that it's on.
Right, yeah. It's not in your face where it makes the music sound like it's got a spread to it
Right.
rather than a wobbly,
Yeah.
you know, where it's kind of cutting up the sound. Now, I don't know, I know Steve Morris would take a chorus pedal
Yeah.
and he would put a dummy input on one side and the other side would have chorus. So from what I understand, one side's clean and the other side is the one that's playing
Yeah,
against the,
it's delayed is what's happening is they're taking the signal and they're splitting it, delaying it some, and then bringing it back in, mixing it in to make it sound like there's two signals coming in.
right, okay, that's why it gives it that stereo sound.
Yeah, that's I mean that's the big, there's a lot more going on than that, but fundamentally they're splitting the signal, making one the quote unquote dry or the natural signal, and then they're doing things to the second signal to make it, uh, as if you and I are playing together, we're no matter how long we've been playing together, we're never going to be perfectly aligned in time. There's going to be some milliseconds that are off,
Yeah,
and the wider spread, of those milliseconds between your guitar and my guitar, there is a there is a setting where it sounds really good. It sounds, two guitars playing together sound really, really good. And but if they were playing exactly the same thing, all you're doing is a doubling, and
right,
doesn't have any it doesn't have anything organic going on in it. And then if you take chorus and you delay it too much, now all of a sudden it becomes an effect, and that is that stuff that that people overuse, or in my estimation, overuse it.
yeah,
But anyway, and it was very, very popular, back in the day, as was phase shifters and things of that nature. You did mention compression, and so we should probably talk about that a little bit. By the way, I will use a chorus if I'm playing, like if I'm singing and I'm playing with you and I'm relying on you to, be the guitar fill guy, and and if I'm singing and I'm playing some notes, I'll use some kind of a chorus, or some people use a pedal that sounds like a Hammond organ, like a what's the cabinet's name? Leslie cabinet.
Leslie, yeah,
Yeah, that's basically a form of chorusing, if you will. I mean,
yeah,
again, please don't send me letters. I'm speaking very, very broadly. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'll use it, and it just makes the guitar a little wider, a little deeper. It gives me a little bit more of a bed to sing with. For certain songs, I kind of like that. And then others, I don't care for it at all. I think it sounds horrible. Again, if you can hear it, it's too much.
yeah,
It's kind of like plastic surgery. If you know that you're looking at plastic surgery, it's probably not good plastic surgery. You know,
yeah,
good plastic surgery, you just think this person is, attractive or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. You don't think of it as like, oh, wow, they really overdid it. They got duck lips, or they got, we won't go into different parts of the anatomy, but but if it's done well and tastefully, it can definitely add to the thing. You mentioned compression. Um, Compression is one of those things that uh, most people don't really understand, and they don't really know how to use it, and it's difficult to explain, um,
yeah,
because it you get pretty deep into the woods. I will say, and there are people that overuse it. A lot of the telly players up in Nashville used to use a lot of compression. I don't know if they're still using a lot. Chicken picking seems to work out real well on with compressors turned on, but I don't know if I'm not really up on what they're doing there now, but I know that compression was really good for that because it allowed them to get, to even out all the dynamics, and it worked out pretty well. Uh, Basically, well, yeah, it's if you want to know about compressors, I would say go Google it, go to Wikipedia, learn a little something about the ballistics of sound and what a compressor is doing. You have ratios, you've got attacks, you've got releases, on all these things that are manipulated by compressors. And I use one a lot, actually. When you and I are playing the duo thing on my acoustic guitar, and I'll
Yeah,
also use it on my jazz box, um, because of the nature of what I'm playing when we're playing together. But I don't use it to the point where you would even, you don't probably even know that it's on, when I'm
right,
playing. It's just there. Um, but I've got a pretty, I don't have the kind of compressor on my guitar that you would find, in a pedal. Not many pedals. I'm sure there are some. Those are more like the old orange squeezer kind of thing, where it's really obvious that something is going on. The compressor I use is more like a studio compressor that does a real nice job of evening out things, and it basically, what they're intended to do is even out dynamics,
right.
fill up the envelope with signal, but not overdrive, and turn things into clipping. So that's primarily what they're for. If you're interested in compressors, I would suggest, um, you check them out. I don't. If you're playing, traditional jazz, I I want dynamics in that stuff.
Yeah,
I want the guitar. I want all the notes to have different levels of sound. I don't want every note to sound at the same level. If
yeah,
I'm singing and I'm using it as a bed, then it's one thing. But if I'm playing a tune where the guitar is being featured, I don't want the compressor on, because it doesn't it takes a lot of the life out of the guitar.
right. It squashes everything and makes everything the same level.
Everything the same level, and that can be beneficial for certain purposes, but not if you're featuring the guitar on that track or in that song, because it
Yeah.
just kills the dynamics of it. So I've done a lot of talking, Bill. I didn't expect to do that, but I have done a lot of talking. What would you like to add to this thing?
Um, well, geez, nowadays there's so many different pedals out there, I know from my own experience, over the years, probably like most guitar players, would get the rack mount stuff, and I had a 12 space rack that was airplane proof, and then I found out the only three things I was using was delay, chorus, and reverb, you know, and a lot of guys are going back to pedals now. That was, I guess you could say, kind of a fad, to have a big rack full of stuff. Um,
Well,
yeah,
here's my bigger pedal board. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Now that's, I don't know what you can see and what you can't. So what's going on here is, on the bottom left is a tuner, and then there's a double overdrive. It's two overdrives in one, jetter gear pedal. And then the next one is a clone, and that's another form of overdrive. Up in the top right is a chorus pedal, and then there's a reverb pedal, or excuse me, that's a delay pedal, then a reverb pedal, and then another reverb pedal. So that's my quote unquote big board. That hasn't been out of the house in a couple of years.
yeah, yeah,
But I used to use it a lot. Back when we were doing all those Sting tunes and all that kind of stuff, I always liked to take it, and of course, to be, genre specific. But
yeah,
um, yeah, so you can get pretty nuts with the variety of pedals that are out there, and I suggest, in if you're interested in knowing more about pedals, there's probably some good articles out there. But I think, as we mentioned earlier, the big three, um, that I think would be the first three that I would purchase if I was going there, would be overdrive. Definitely number one is overdrive, because you can. Brad Jetter of Jetter Gear makes a pedal called the Dolce Vita, which, the whole purpose of that was to take, like a Strat or a Tele, and to add a little more, of what makes an arch top sound like an arch top. I'm not going to say it turns your Strat into an arch top, but it definitely fattens it up, and gives it a little bit more of that girth. Um, but I would definitely have an overdrive pedal. Then after that, if your amp doesn't have a reverb, then I would get a reverb. And after that, I would get a delay pedal. Those are the big three. Um, if you're interested in talking about more of this, you guys, you can send me an email. just to bob@jazzguitartoday.com, and I'll be happy to take a look at those emails. And we can talk about these things more in depth. If you want to say, hey, I really wish I knew more about this or that or the other thing, and blah 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 blah, then if there's enough interest, I'd be happy to to share with you what I know, and then I also have friends in the industry that know a lot more than I do about it to bring them in and guest on here, and we can talk about pedals and all that in specifics. Bill and I are just talking about kind of the big brush. We're just talking about overall. So I think that's about it for me, Bill. Unless you got something else you want
I mean, the only thing I could say is I could probably live the rest of my life as a guitar player with distortion, reverb, and delay.
to.
When I had the big rack mount stuff, I felt like if I wasn't using all 128 sounds, I wasn't getting my money's worth because those things are expensive.
Well, I I'm gonna tell you something. Because this is I have photographs of this. So um, I remember one gig I went out. I set up a full stereo guitar rig, 2 amps. I had two huge pedal boards, you know, together, and then I had a switcher between the amps and all of that. And I think the third song that the leader called was like Mustang Sally.
Yeah.
I thought, wait a minute. I was just a hired gun on the gig. I mean, did somebody call and say, yeah, I bought all this stuff. I had it all. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to drag it all out and we're going to make something happen. And oh God, what a mess. And then I did a thing with Roland several years ago where I bought all their high-end synthesizer gear. And
Hmm.
I have pictures of this. I can show you pictures of this. And they at that time, and I don't want to get anybody mad at me from Roland, but they at that time I had hired, I couldn't make it work. And I've got a pretty technical background. I could not make it work. And I called him up. I said, hey, how is this supposed to, go together? Because it's not happening the way that, the, the instructions say it's supposed to happen. And they said, well, we've never really done it. What? Yeah, but there's a guy that used to work for us who knows more about this than anybody else. So he said he happens to live in Atlanta, so I called him up and I paid him. I think I paid him $100 to come over here. This was 20 years ago, and he couldn't make it work either. And so I let them know. I said, hey, look, this is what I want to do. This is what it's supposed to do. This is everything that's and we're talking about thousands of dollars worth of stuff because it was the true professional modules and everything that they had, that people were, like Stevie Wonder were you. I mean, this was the big stuff, and I've got photographs of all this stuff, but it was so they I said, if you will do this, um, if you will do this and do that and do this and make it so that you can put this together, then you really, really have something. And I'm looking it up right now because they actually built this thing, um, and it was like $300.
Hmm.
And I'm going to find the model of it and it worked. And I tried it out, and it did everything that I wanted it to do, and I hated it. I was like, I think it's the GR55.
Yeah.
They're $1,000, and that was pretty much everything. I think that was what it was, the GR55. That was everything, and I had all this stuff, and and it just would not, or maybe it's the SY 1000. I don't know. It's one of those, and when I put it all together, when I got that pedal, I tried it out at a store because I just went down to a store. And I probably had $5,000 worth of rolling stuff at the time, and other stuff. And like I said, I've got photographs of cables going everywhere, and trying to get them all to interact. And this one little box, they did exactly what I asked them to. They probably had it in the works while I was screwing around, but but it worked. But then at that time, I kind of outgrew wanting that. I didn't need it. So even though they did a really good job with it, they did a great job because wow, it really does all that. It was a sound that I just had moved past, went beyond. All right, William. Well, that's it for me today, buddy.
That's it for me.
All right, man. Well, listen, Bob Bakert with Bill Hart shooting the shit about guitars and pedals. Um, you can check Bill out at where? What's your website, Bill?
BillHartMusic.com.
And Bill also teaches. You're still teaching online?
I still teach online. Yep.
All
I
right.
have a couple of students around the world.
Yeah, and then obviously, if you live in Atlanta, you can get a hold of Bill. And I think, are you teaching in a studio around town at all?
Not really. I do a lot of private lessons.
Okay, all right. You can study with Bill, who's uh, for people that I know that I actually can talk to. Bill's got more experience teaching than anybody that I know. I mean, 30 years and 28 years the most prestigious guitar school in Atlanta. During that era.
Yeah.
As the director of guitar. I mean, if you want to learn something about the guitar, Bill's also got a great book on jazz, straight ahead jazz. What's the title of your book? Your book?
Jazz, solo jazz guitar.
Yeah, and I looked at it and I thought this is a great book, and I learned I think I learned one tune out of it, and I went, wow, this is good stuff. So if you want to get some arrangements that Bill's done and all of that, it's available and you can pick that up. Is it a Mel Bay book or how did
Uh,
they get that?
Hal Leonard.
Hal Leonard book. So Bill Hart. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much. Bob Bakert with Bill Hart for Jazz Guitar today. Y'all have a great rest of your Monday. Bye bye.